Do you want more success, more growth, more results? Then it's time for the Boundless Success Accelerator from the Modern Observer Group. This isn't your average coaching program. It's where top performers come to dominate. Weekly group sessions, on-demand coaching, a community that's got your back, and a power-packed library of tools to supercharge your business and career. No more excuses, no more waiting. Get in, level up, and start building the life you've been dreaming about. Visit us at modernobserver.com/boundlesssuccess to join today. Let's get you to the next level.
We are lighting the candle. Hi, everybody. It's a world that works. You know it, and I know it. I'm Bill Correll, and I'm here with Jeremias, my dear friend. And we've been doing this for a while. It's kind of nice to have a body of work like we do now, being over 200 episodes that we have recorded and published out to about 17 different platforms. That, on the one hand, it seems like a lot, but on the other hand, I just remember what my dear friend who Ken introduced me to, what John would ask, well, what is that you just did? And the answer to that is always, well, not all that much. Mm-hmm. So there's a lot to be said with counting on the best to come, with whatever effort you've made now, please don't let that be the high watermark of your existence, because as time goes on, there's all these opportunities to mentally, physically, metaphysically, spiritually, all planes to upgrade.
Mm-hmm. I was listening to, as always, I was listening to a podcast because I listen to a lot of podcasts, and two things come to mind from what you said. One is that every conversation we have, like now.
Right.
Before now, it was like, this conversation is unique in its own entity. They're never the same, because we're not the same people who come into the conversation. But there is this element of creativity, that we create something every single time. And if we went back and looked back, to listen to some of our previous episodes and to try to recreate them, we couldn't, even if we tried.
Yeah.
And so that they are unique. And so I think that's like, remember how unique you are. And maybe this is almost like the summation and the beginning.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is, I was listening to this podcast, and she was talking about like competition and, some competition in the fact of like, you look around in the world and you notice what's around and you kind of like set goals for yourself or whatever. And she kept on saying, the only person I'm competing with is myself and who I was yesterday. Like, that's all I'm doing. And she's a writer, and she's like, the only thing I like to look at, I think to myself, I want to be a better writer than I was like previously. And I just love that idea of just like being the best version of yourself.
Yeah. It just kind of reminds me of an amalgamation. Seems like it might have been Rumi, or it might have been Buddha, or it could have been one of the Stoics, but that the nirvana is the state of being unrecognizable by who you were this morning. So I just made that up, but at the same time, I was influenced by people that I can't remember for sure. But if you stop and think about it, the highest expression in the moment now of who you can be is who you are, and only compared to who you were when you got out of bed this morning.
Mm-hmm.
There's a game to play.
Yeah. And, even if you don't, to me, you can look at that situationally. I think that's a word.
I like it. Not it is now.
No, that's right. Where okay, I handled that situation this way. Could I handle a similar situation better as far as like for all involved,
Mm,
not and so kind of looking at it like, okay, well, I had that reaction or I had that circumstance happen and this is how I responded. And then how could I would respond differently if it happens again? Like, and it could be a conversation. It
yep.
could be anything that you put like that happens to you throughout your day. Your kid says something and you snap, or you're not focused and whatever, or your spouse or significant other or a colleague. And then all of a sudden you're
Yeah.
like, okay, maybe next time around I kind of say something different, or I listen more. And so can I be
Yeah.
better at it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you stop and think about it, there's a lot of ways to evaluate what just happened.
Mhm.
One is to contextualize it as a lesson, and what did I learn from it, and how will that inform my next similar experience, or will I even remember that it occurred? So that's one way to do it, and it's neither validating nor invalidating what had happened and how you did it. It's more from the standpoint of, let me look underneath, let me see what's going on here, and let me see if I'm satisfied with how it occurred, what I'm left with afterwards. Like, there's no aftertaste about it, except for I stepped in something and I came out smelling like a rose. Why not live a life that's just full of that experience where it's always win-win, and you don't leave a moment until you've decided what the win is in the moment? Can you imagine playing that game all the time?
Mm.
No regret.
No regret. And I love that just because I think of relationships and how often do we regret in a relationship? Things left unsaid, things we said that we shouldn't have said, you know, um, how we showed up, whatever, the list goes on and on.
Yeah.
And I think about the relationships where I guess I think about the relationship where with my father, that when he passed, I really had no regrets. And and that's there's something so obviously it's beautiful because then you alleviate. And was the relationship perfect? Of course it wasn't. In so many ways, for all in a way, I think it was perfect. But
Yep.
there were times, but it was perfect because it was growing and evolving. That's where the perfection was. Did we handle everything optimally? At different points, did I handle myself optimally? Did he handle probably, most likely not, because we're imperfect beings. But when I look at the whole, there's something very rewarding in that there was no regrets.
Yeah. Yeah, that aftertaste, which in some cases can last a lifetime. And you want to really do yourself in, have regrets about somebody who's no longer here to have the conversation with, you know? So there's a couple of different things I love about what you're saying. And what it really kind of comes down to is, if we could just adopt, in advance, before everything happens, that whatever it is, however it turns out, it's perfect. We don't have to disclaim it by acknowledging that the people involved are imperfect. By human standards, according to Billy Joel, you're supposed to make mistakes, right?
Hmm. Yeah, no, and I love what you're saying because there is this element of beauty in the messiness,
Yep.
and an element of curiosity and experiment, like almost like experimentation of
Yep.
like, oh, okay, I'm gonna see if this works. Didn't do, I'm gonna see if I'm gonna open myself up to trying it this way. And it's gonna be different and might not work, but that's all learning too.
Yeah. Yeah, the really neat part of all of this is, as the Buddhists would say, to be self-aware enough to notice that you are attached to an outcome. When you can detach from the outcome, you have the chance to live, the perfect expression of yourself. That's with a capital S. That makes it a proper noun, not just a pronoun, right?
Mhm.
So self with a small s is the one that's no time has gone into trying to understand, no time to try to develop it and upgrade it and do all those neat things, where you can look at a situation and always decide, I'm going to find the humor in this and I'm going to hang with it until I do. And if I'm not laughing about it yet, then I'm still being a butthead. So in life, when you can take responsibility for how things turn out, you'll never know how they really did. Do you know what I mean? Our perception of what happens is exactly that. It's not reality, but it's come through a bunch of filters. We received it on whatever dial setting we had it at that day, at whatever volume and whatever background noise there was. So the neat part of it is to have conversations with people that end up working, so that the conversation isn't about what you said or should have said. It's about what did you understand. You know that old saying, don't tell me what you're looking at, tell me what you see.
Mhm. Well, it's also don't tell me, it's almost that idea also of like, what did you hear?
Yeah,
Because, that's why, when someone says something, we filter it and hear it through a particular like audio filter.
right.
And there's so many things that affect that. It's like tone and verbiage used and, common languaging, whatever you want to call it, words chosen. Um, and so, this is what you said, but this is what I heard you say basically, or is this what you meant to say? Yeah.
Yes.
Versus this is what I assume you meant to say.
Yeah, I used to work with a guy, the first electronics company that I ever worked in. This guy was he was ex-army and he'd been trained as a electronics technician in the army, and so now he had oversight over this all the divisions that did testing for the assembled products, and did the programming of software so that the phone systems would work, etc. But he would almost always say, "What did you mean by that, Bill?" You know, what do you mean by that, Bill? At first, I kind of, it kind of took me back a little bit, but I finally decided that's kind of cool. This is a guy who makes his living with software, and the software is unambiguous. It either works the same way all the time or it doesn't work at all. You know what I mean? So here he is, he's testing like a full duplex system. What that is in electronics, I know I've talked about it before. It's where information gets sent by one sending unit to another receiving unit that gets returned back to that sending unit again to verify that exactly what it was that was received. Now, human beings wouldn't get much done if you said, what do you mean by that every single time somebody opened their mouth up? However, you can say things like, can you say more about that? Or so I can understand better, what kind of a feeling do you have attached with what you're saying? How does that make you feel? And so there things that are important probably need more than just a few words that may have been said with some emotional attachment to it, anger or fear or upset or love. It's really nice to completely receive something like a gift, no matter what the message is.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm sitting with that. Well, because and then beyond the words, there's so much, facial expression, body language, tone. So beyond what's said and their description of what's said, there's, it's almost like the words like I've not resonated for years when people say, "How are you?" and they just say, "Fine." Like the word fine to me is this kind of like, basically, I'm not fine, but you probably like it. And so, how are you? I'm fine, kind of tone. And, what it comes across, like you can just tell by tone and body language, and I don't want to say job, but to me, it's almost like your, and I don't want to use like the word job, just like it's your job to kind of ask the questions to get them to actually open up about how they really, let's say, are doing. And so, and I'm not quite sure the another word to use, like, except for job, but it's like your role or your, I don't want to even use the word responsibility. Like, I mean, but part of me feels
Sacred mission. Try that on for
sacred
size.
mission. That's better. I like that one. Thank you, Bill.
Understanding, the quest for understanding is a sacred mission, in my opinion.
It is a sacred mission, and it is the sacred mission to sit there and delve a little deeper with people, you know, and to ask maybe some really targeted questions, you know, I don't know, just get creative or, start almost a conversation of meaningless stuff because that will lead to this sort of comfortableness or easefulness that will allow for other things to unfold
Yeah.
rather than just, moving on. Because that's, I think, what we tend to do because it seems like it's too much work. Use another four-letter word, work.
Yeah, and I'm gonna put to use something that you said, whether it's on spot on or not. But I think that the notion of how you and I interacted with our dads, okay, for example, from the time we were very small, and I'm sure that we had, he had a way of being with us, we had a way of being with our dads, and then we got into circumstances and we succeeded and we failed and we did all those things. And there were lots of opportunities to have things get partially said but never understood. But you and I were blessed to be around our dads the last couple of years of their lives when there was no pretext for them. Because I think we both had very powerful dads. I think we had dads that were up to something in the world and they had a view of themselves in terms of what that meant and how important it was for them to have a persona and to always be in charge of a situation and at least give everybody the sense that everything's all right just by who they're being. Whether they decided to do that or not, or they just adopted it as a dad thing over time, I think we do that to a certain extent. So the blessed time together at the end was when we got to say all the things that were on our mind without risk. Do you know what I mean? It cost us nothing to respond to our dads exactly where they were, whether they were in the throes of a dementia event or something of that nature, getting them to laugh was blessed. Do you know what I mean? So how could we not be complete having those, memories in our body? I'm getting goosebumps right now thinking about how it was with my dad, with nobody else around. This had nothing do with what anybody else might think. This was all about having a connection and a relationship with my dad as a human being at a human being level, maybe for not very often like that, throughout 70 years of being his son.
Yeah, I think there was, and I think there was the things that I don't know. There's something about that time where you see the essence of them
Yep.
that's still there. The things that were so much a part of my father.
Yep.
Like, and they were little things, you know, and all that was going on and the fact that he didn't eat much or he couldn't eat or what he ate, he like wasn't neat or whatever. He
Yep.
would take his napkin and he would fold it exactly like perfectly and put it back next to the plate till like the day he passed. It was just something that was so meticulous and so precise and so much of who he was as a person throughout the how much, the 60 years of my life,
Yeah.
that I was just like, that's so him. Like, even my mother commented on it because she looked at it and she's like, still, with everything, that's still like sort of summed up who he was. And then there were some other things which were just when you kind of shaved away or got rid of all the stuff that might have been hard to watch or made you a little bit of a tinge of sadness because, you know, some of it was, whether it be degrading or kind of like sort of like the real um life as it tends to leave, like in the body, in the physical faculties, are the physical things that go, and the mental stuff. But there were still things that remain
Yeah.
that you get to witness. And then there are the cute little things. Like I remember at one point, it was probably the last time I saw him, and I'm sitting there, and he was in the hospital, and my father had a beard, not like your beard, Bill, but it was a nice beard. And I
You, as
sat,
a matter of fact.
yeah, I sat there looking at him, and I started to just like brush his beard on the side, and he just turned to me with this loving look, and he just said to me, "You love my beard, don't you?" And I said, "Yes, I do." To this day, I remember that. It was just like, and so like that was something special because he knew I did. And so like he looked at me, knew exactly who I was, knew how much I loved him.
Yeah. So I think there were a couple of things that were present that I can talk about now that I would not have been aware of, 2 years ago when we were getting close to the end with my dad. Was just there was nothing at risk. I would never have said that to anybody. I just would, there was an ease and a comfort about being around him. And I had so many opportunities. Thank God the last 2 years he had come up and was living in Mystic, uh, and had sold the home that he'd been in. They built it back in 2000. He lived there for 20 some odd years. And I think the familiarity uh, and the playing with him in terms of the trips that he would take, into his memory, and they would be like a present time thing for him. And I would always just plain meet him wherever he was. That was the goal for me, not to try to direct him back to anything other than that. But if he was having a good time remembering the first girl that he ever dated, he was so funny. And I asked him about her, and I said, "Did you ever kiss her?" He said, "Yeah, I did." And I said, "Well, what really attracted you to her?" And this is a blind man who's 88 years old. He says she had big boobs. This was my father who never said anything like that ever before, and he's telling me about, for the first time, a story about this gal that he dated in seventh or eighth grade. But there were so many of those moments that they're meaningless. They're almost like the background flowers that are blooming right now, they kind of lost their front stageness, to the magnolias, which are just overpowering, and dogwoods and all that. But now that those trees have kind of gone by, I'm starting to see all these other flowers all around the yard that are quite remarkable in their own simplicity. And I keep loving the word uniqueness, because I look at all of these flowers that from 50 feet away, 40 or 50 of them, they all look exactly the same. But when you get up close, they're different. Every last one of those blossoms is different from all the rest of them that are right there. So I don't know, in what we're talking about in terms of engaging people and gamifying it, as I like to say, you don't want to spend all your time planning out how the interaction is going to go, because now all you're doing is prescripting a formula. But what you do want to do is notice when you're doing that, so that you can get back to asking a real question again, and really engage somebody and increase your relatedness every time you're around each other. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, because I think to myself, what you described is like, if you're prescripted, you've eliminated the possibility of creativity because it's almost like you've scheduled something.
Right.
You become you created some sort of limitation for it. Limitation in the fact that from what you kind of decided, there's limited possibilities. Where if you kind of leave an openness, there's limitless possibilities or unlimited possibilities for where it could go.
Sure.
And what you describe is as far as the flowers go. So this past weekend, I think you know, Bill, I led 4 meditations for an event, a grief festival for Karen Mikos of the Quietest House. And in it, at one point, we did this kind of walk through an area of the farm which was pretty dense and or had these kind of curves and shadows and everything, and just to see what was grown, like the growth there. And there were flowers, like wildflowers on the floor, like violets and other flowers. And there were some beautiful, like a few blooming trees, but just and everything. But then we went to a higher elevation and we just looked out upon that where which we, we had just experienced, and how it was beautiful in its own way. But you also didn't see all the different like little differences that we had seen when we were below. We
Right.
just didn't, because we couldn't, because of the view. There were some huge trees that were kind of overpowering that scene from above, where when we walked through, all of a sudden you noticed, little teeny pine cones on pine trees, or you saw, you know, little flowers or sap going down the bark of another tree and stuff, where you had the details,
Yeah.
those beautiful details that you would have missed had you only seen it from above.
Yeah. I've always loved that saying that the divine is in the details, you know?
Yeah, me too.
Um, and the neat part of it is recognizing and distinguishing that the details are not the same. You know, what perceived details seem to be the same around the yard. Like I've got a carpet with 3 different colored violets everywhere, thousands of them, you know. They're pink, they're white, and they're purple. And they are absolutely gorgeous. And I live for this time of year. It's here for about 3 weeks, and I won't mow my lawn until probably around, I don't know, maybe later than the 12th or the 15th this year, for 2 reasons. Number one, I don't want to end those waves of color, and the other thing is that that's my contribution, you know, to the bee population. And it's kind of neat, you know, to make sure that they've got at least some place that they can go and be bees, you know. And it's a wonderful thing, you know, just to, I don't know, I have neighbors in the area that probably think I'm eccentric, or my wife is, but
Mhm.
she's worse than me the same way, you know.
Mhm. Now, there's something about, I think, because I was a fine art minor. So if you look at like some of the masters or some of the real good painters, where from afar you see it one thing, and then you go up close, like Rembrandt, and then all of a sudden you see each brushstroke and you see the highlights. Or I remember I actually did a pointillist painting. And so, where hours of dots, where you're focused on, the coloring kind of thing, but the picture is totally different when you get that perspective.
Right.
And so there's something really beautiful about being able to step back and look at something from a different, and I think we did it with our dads, because what was that perspective, was that we realized what was important.
Yeah.
And the importance was that we spent time with them, that all the other stuff that you get hung up on through the years seems silly and insignificant. And the most valuable thing is that you're there and you have that time. Like, that's what's important. And
Yeah.
the love, obviously. And they know that and the love that they know, my father knew I loved him. Like, obviously. So it was the time and the love. That was what, like, all the other stuff tends to, you realize how silly it is, so much of it.
Well, when you get to a certain age, certain level, certain all of these things, the short-term memory is shot. I mean, it is just plain shot. And when there's also some dementia on top of that, all there is now. This is it. There's no other thing to do than just be present
Mhm.
and to try to direct or change or correct or bring back or any of that kind of stuff. I watched family members in different situations. I've got a dear couple that we hung out for all these years, my best friend and his wife. He could not allow his wife to say things that he knew were not true or that he thought were not true. So in the heat of the moment with her having full-blown dementia, he would say, that never happened. Come on back now. You know, you're making things up. You know, it's like, that's not useful. I mean, you're creating tension, for her, you're creating tension for the rest of us in the room, you know? And I then realized he had no choice. He had to do that. That was him holding on to his age and his loss of memory and his being scared to death. He'd end up being in the same kind of situation with dementia himself. You know what I mean?
And I think it's also, to me, as I'm listening, it was him holding on to what was in the what he remembered in the relationship. And I think that a lot of times in situations like that, we're holding on to some sort of aspect of who they were
Yep.
because we identify it in those memories. But I think a lot when we talk about conversations, and I think about, stuff I've been through of late and people, what they've said or whatever. And I've like actually, said to people in my life, what you're sharing with me right now is just not useful. It's just not helping me. I appreciate it, but it's not useful. Like it's not making me feel whatever. Maybe there is nothing to say that would, in that circumstance, that might make someone feel better,
Yep.
But is to be able to, and to be able to say that with certain people, there has to be a certain level of a relationship of, this idea of, I understand that, whatever it's hard to watch or whatever I'm going through is, about me. This has nothing to do with you. But what you're sharing with me right now is not making me feel any better, And I
Right.
think that it takes courage to say something like that. Well, depending on the relationship, it can take courage because, if you might not want to hurt somebody's feelings or whatever. But at points, you like have to sit there and say, that's really not helping me. Just not helping, All it does is make me feel worse or
Yeah.
whatever it is.
Well, I can tell you, um, I've experienced being very, very personally challenged in relating to people who I loved in situations where they clearly were not interested in me understanding. And that's very difficult to be around. First of all, not interested in me getting it. They just want to chew. They want to scream. They want to shout. They want to cry, And that's the hardest thing to do is to stand in there with somebody who is in a very awful place spiritually and psychologically. And they're not interested in getting out of there anytime soon.
Yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah. I don't even know if it's not that, to me, I would beg to differ. Is I don't know if that they're not interested, is that they can't see it. And it's almost like when you're in that amount of, let's say, whatever distraughtness, I don't know another word to use or whatever it is, you can't see, like you're blinded. It's like you're wearing blinders that a horse wears and you have a very limited visual span. Like it's very, like you're very hyper focused on one thing and it's very hard to get out of it.
yeah,
I was talking about that this morning with two friends that were collaborating on a book together. And I was saying that you have to sort of grasp onto something. And I say grasp because it is like a lifeline. Grasp onto something which, if you can find it, which still lights up your soul in
right.
some way, in some way. And it could be whatever that is for you, something that reminds you or that does get you out of, even if it's for seconds or milliseconds. It's
Yep.
like, and so it's finding that thing for yourself, which reminds you and is this feeling of like, okay, and maybe it's a breath, like something as simple as that, but those small little glimmers of pure like space almost around whatever's going on seem to be, for me anyway, because I think about the thing that gives me great joy. And so what does it give, what do I, how can I add that more of that into my life? So even if whatever was is still there,
Yep.
I become more than that one thing that's not working.
I think you're giving an apt description of the person who's helplessly standing around and witnessing you having a bad day. It's almost like you have to give up your commitment that they get better in the moment. It's got to be more like, how can you twist yourself out of shape because you love them, not because you're a masochist. Okay. I'm not saying hang out any place that it's really all that uncomfortable for you. Sometimes the best thing you can do is say, hey, I can see that my being around right now is not making things better. Let me know when you're open to having a conversation, and I'll be here for you anytime that is. I mean, you got to almost be like a Swiss Army knife. Do you know what I mean?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think
And be willing to fold it up and go home.
yeah. Or what do you need right now? Let me take out the fork. Or maybe now you need the knife or,
Right.
the spoon, whatever it is. And I like that idea of being a Swiss Army knife because I think that that's what we're asked to do when we're with people. But I think that, yeah, yeah. And it's just, I don't know. I think for me, it's really realizing even about myself that, one is you don't walk around expecting anybody to make it, like, you realize that you're the one that has to make it better as much as you would love for someone else to like come in and, do it for you.
Magical thinking doesn't ever go away.
No, no. And I have the same situation when I'm with people who, I know that are making, let's say, unhealthy or or let's say very limiting health decisions in a very narrow way of thinking of things, the fact that they know best and they aren't open to hearing possibilities. And it's very hard to sit back and watch people do things that are going to be harmful to them or not move them out of where they are in some sort of physical place, like a physical health place. It's very hard to watch because that, your gut is telling you that you could do something. And you're like, okay, well, can't do anything unless they're open to it.
So we've discussed a lot of different elements of a conversation and relationship. There's the one where people are saying something to you that they're probably going to expect you to remember, but if you weren't challenged in the moment to like say, make sure you got a handle on this because 2 or 3 years from now it might be important again, or you just know that that's the way you relate to this person, that they're going to come back and whatever it is that you don't remember is going to get tossed up your nose, or it might just be where the words that are going back and forth are charged emotionally and they're not a clear communication. And then there's the ones where there's just no communication interest or ability to get to the point of communicating on either side. And so I don't know. We keep talking about. Excuse me. I think I swallowed some pollen in my lungs, but I think the point is that keep coming back to the self-awareness. That's the best shot you got. You're going to have to be aware of your own stuff and your own reactions and your own thinking about a situation before you can start taking on the responsibility for what the other person is saying and what that means for you. Does that make any sense?
Mm-hmm.
So you have to come into a situation with some sort of commitment. I mean, just that knowing that you are committed to having a relationship that works with somebody, that can be enough to get you through the tough parts, to get to the good bits, rather than putting that off 3 or 4 more conversations to sometime next summer.
Yeah, and then I look at this. I look at a few of the friendships, really close friendships that I've created over the past few years.
Yep.
And I'm sorry, just because no matter your age, you can still make new friends.
Yep. Yes, you
I
can.
yes, you can. So I want to put that out there to begin with. But it does. I mean, there is this element of like having to learn about somebody, learn about yourself in the relationship and that kind of thing. But being open to learning about somebody and then being open to be vulnerable so that someone gets to learn about you.
Right.
Because I look at one of the probably the best relationships that I've created over the past, that I've co-created with someone over the past few years. And there is this element of learning about each other
Yep.
that you have to be willing to do. And all the things that we think about when we want, kindness and compassion and the element of, humor. And, I always say that my beautiful collaborations that I do with Mary Jane, when we meet on Fridays, I think we laugh for 2 hours. I mean, we laugh most of the entire time, which might be twofold. We meet Fridays at the end of the day, like sort of afternoon, end of the day. And I think we're both tired from the week. So I think we're a little punchy. So I think that's some of it.
That's good.
But some of it is also like we share the same, like we both have this very similar sense of humor. So usually like when she says something, and now I can sit there and say something, whatever, and in response, or we both just start to laugh. But there is this very sort of refreshing, I guess is a really good word, refreshing ability for us to both laugh at each other and at ourselves.
Yes.
Which,
I would have to say that that's part of the the hidden formula. It's not intentional, but there's a resonance between human beings. That if you have 2 guitars in a room tuned exactly the same way, you pluck a string on one guitar, the string on the other guitar, that's tuned to the same will resonate and quiver. Okay, you'll actually be able to hear it make a sound. I think friends do that. I think they get on the same wavelength, and especially if there's a free, almost silly kind of a trust that goes on between. I mean, not like you can't be very intense and intentional about important things that require it, but there's kind of a contract that between you and me, when we get together, there's no crap. Okay, we're just going to have a good time, and when we see crap on the other person, we're going to call it out immediately, if not sooner, and that's going to be fun. We'll do it in a joyful, hysterical kind of a way.
And I think if we go to that whole idea of having a relationship, like you said, getting to know yourself earlier, and a relationship with yourself is actually to look at yourself and realize with a humorous element when you're full of it.
Yeah.
And when you're doing something, like you sit there and you're like, oh my gosh, like really, like you're getting upset about this. It's like, and you laugh at yourself, like you really figure and and I think when you're like that with other people, because I think of different things that Tonka has done through the years, where this element of where I actually have to laugh.
Yep.
Because it's so funny and it's who he is.
Excuse me 1 second. Okay. I'm just going to take this because I've been waiting for biopsy results.
Mm-hmm.
Both biopsies are benign.
Okay, good. Excellent.
Well, my situation. I've only had about 50 or 60 excisions and treatments over the last 12 or 13 years. So all I can say, where we are right now, Gee, many Christmas. That's just so perfect that that came up right now. In the background, there's a little bit of concern about how something's going to turn out. Do you know what I mean? Even when you forget that you were concerned about it, it's still kind of there as a low-lying um, sort of a routine that's running. And I could tell by the sound of her voice when she told me, how, hi, this is Sue, and I just want to let you know that they're both benign. And I've had the call come through so many times before. Nope, we're going to have to see you, and you're going to have Mohs surgery on your face or whatever. And in our relationships with each other, I want to say that those incomplete things where we haven't gotten validation or correction or completion of those unfinished conversations, that's kind of how we greet them, with those things running in the background underneath. Some of them we may be aware of, but there may be other ones that are kind of creating a false barrier, if you will, in terms of our relationship with each other. I
Hmm.
think that comes down very quickly with dear friends. The trust is there, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think there is this element of trust, and even that's somewhat. Even that I think is learned.
Yeah.
You know, I've been in situations where I opened up, and then I think we open up, and then we're like, oh my gosh, did I say too much? Did I share too much?
Right.
And you live and you learn. Like, you learn how to listen to your intuition, your gut, and you sit there and under certain circumstances, maybe you do. But then the really good, when it really works,
Yep.
you remember that it's all worthwhile because, the really strong relationships that you have are built on that.
Yep. There's another whole element to what we do during the course of the day. Maybe it's different for you because you are very analytical by training and probably a little bit by nature. But I don't usually find myself kind of qualifying communications while they're going on, if you will. It's just an interaction. And I kind of like the fact that I operate my life based on one premise: I love everyone. And I don't even mind when they're trying to prove me wrong. But they don't know this. I mean, I tell people, acquaintances, maybe the first or second time that I see them, you do know that I love you, right? And some people will say, well, what do you mean by love? And then I will say, well, what do you mean by love? Because what you mean by love is far more important than my telling you what it means to me. And they don't think about this very often. Like, when was the last time somebody kind of walked up to you on the street and said, you're smiling, can you tell me what it is about your life that you love? It'd be like, okay, are this people with the white coats coming to get you or what? But if you stop and think about it, if all we did with each other was to go and say, hey, what's working in your life right now? What have you got to be joyful about?
Hmm. I mean, I love that idea because I think it shifts people's focus, me included, and from what's not working to what's working.
Right.
I recently had a post that I put up, and just because you said I love you, um, it says, I love you. You're probably thinking you don't even know me. And then, but if people can hate for no reason, then I can love for no reason.
Amen.
So, I probably had the most responses. Like, people love that. And it's so true. Like, and I was talking about that this morning. I was saying that I basically, I walk around, I've always walked around, but I walk around basically thinking that everybody's a good person. Like, that's just an automatic to me. Like, it's kind of like I assume that everybody's a good person. That's just how I navigate the world. People always look at me, and I think partly because I lived in New York City for a long time, and people are like, oh my gosh, that you have to keep your guard up and you have to be careful and everything. But I basically always walked around looking like, just feeling like everybody's a good person.
Yeah.
Just like, yeah.
And I can say that even more so, it needs to happen in New York City. Do you know somebody who's in charge like that, who feels like their life's in control and that nobody can come up and mess them up? They rarely get messed with for some stupid reason. Why is that?
Mm-hmm.
As the people who look down in a way and try to escape from a situation, I don't know. I don't have that much recent experience of walking around New York City, but I enjoyed kind of going and being me in Harlem. That was pretty cool for an afternoon.
I think it's different though for a man than a woman. I mean, I do
Probably.
have to say, I do have to say. So I do think, and I'm not saying that you're not aware. I just basically go into it with the fact that everybody's like, it's like when I drive around now, like,
Yeah.
or I go into the store here or whatever, that basically you know, everybody's a good person.
Well, I can tell just from a constitutional standpoint, me being 6'4", weighing 250 pounds, having been trained in Taekwondo for about 3 years from the time I was 20 to 23. That put a little bit of pep in my step, which I think is still there. I don't think I deserve to have that pep in my step as much as I did when I was 20 or 22. But the point is I still feel like in most situations, I'm going to be okay. And I don't know that women, in particular, or even smaller guys or somebody who's been roughed up at some point.
That's right.
You just never know, which is why, I don't know. I think this whole notion of leadership, of what we're doing, what you and I are doing by expressing our views and, me especially expounding like I know something, which I really want to acknowledge I don't. All I'm saying is these are things or seemings to me. They seem like in a lifetime of how things have gone. I generally feel that having a powerfully positive attitude, not saying that everything's going to be perfectly cool, but I'll be good no matter how it turns out. I'm going to be there and I'll be able to stand up for myself. So the downside could have been, hey, Bill, because I got this little thing here on my forehead. That was where the biopsy was. Now that typically would involve maybe a 2 or 3 hour Mohs treatment, which would be several layers of skin being removed. I've done it enough times, Jan. I know I'm going to be okay. Yeah, I have to deal with, the not getting it wet for a day and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I've done it so many times I can do it in my sleep. But all I do know is there are so many other people out there who have gone through the same or who are finding out for the first time that they have to go and have a tumor removed from their neck or something of that nature, and it scares the bejeebers out of them.
Mm-hmm.
So I like being the guy in the room who can basically say, it's worked out pretty okay for me about 50 or 60 times. I think you'll be okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a dear friend here who recently just went in to have a tumor removed from her neck, and they were not sure how it was going to turn out. And then when she got it's benign, no cancer found. I mean, the two of us long distance celebrated, happy dance in Rhode Island, happy dance in Connecticut, right?
Right. But I do think that, I mean, I was talking earlier and I just feel that is just, these conversations to me, no matter what's shared. So let's say I'm not, I am going to be the person who worries or whatever. It's just hearing different people. One is the person who, like, I think people like to hear that there's someone out there who feels like I do, who is worried, who that
Yes.
would happen to, and they can relate to, let's say, one person. And another person relates to the person who's always positive and who sits there and everything. Because I think that, for people who tend to be worried, if you were to like talk to them about being positive, they would tell you that you're full of whatever, you're full of baloney, and they can't feel that
Right.
way. And because that's not the way they navigate the world, whether that's wrong or right, but that's not their mode of operation. While other people can operate from that place. And that's the power of sharing individual perspectives and stories, because everybody relates to somebody, hopefully, or a story, or the way they phrase it or they tell it, their experience. And then they're like, oh, okay, whew, good. I'm not alone in this. Like other people out there are worried. Okay. I feel better now just for knowing that I'm not the only one in the world who feels like that, who's scared or whatever. And then other people relate to people in the other way.
Yeah. Yeah. And I appreciate what you're saying, because don't misunderstand. I would much rather not be operated on,
Right. No,
if I have my druthers, it's okay. I mean, I don't mind that we had the knife fight, when you were taking the biopsies, but if we can call it a day there, I'm going to be a happy clam.
That's
And
right.
I'm even to the point where the gal who scans me every 6 months, she's been looking at me with her laser focus, every inch of my body twice a year since 2012. And so I have fun with her, and I go, you know what? You're like 0 for 4 in the last, 4 biopsies that you've done that you thought were probably, some kind of a, whatever, basal cell or a squamous or whatever. And you know what? We're over that. And then, so I'm at the point now when we went in last week for her to take a look at it. And I said, you know the rules, right? And she said, well, what's that? And I said, well, what you say goes. Something's got to come off. You take it off, get it tested. And if you're wrong, then the two of us have a little smile long distance, And I'd much rather you be wrong 20 times and right one, than being wrong 21 times. You know what I mean? And not doing it. So, I mean, it's just, what we're doing right now is exactly what I was talking about. I'm saying enough until I got the nod out of you. And I know that you get it. There are other things in your life that you kind of feel the same way about, that they're not a big deal, but they're a deal. And they come up, and that's what it is to be a human being.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that, just learn. Yeah, I guess I would just encourage people to kind of start to explore the way they operate. Not, and to be willing to learn to operate maybe a little differently, but if something's not working for you, if you're constantly in a place of agitation and angst, then see if you can. I'm not, when I speak from experience and I speak from not getting it right a lot of the time, so,
Yes.
and knowing I get it wrong, like a lot of the time, and so I sit there and I'm like, okay, did not do that. Well.
Yeah. That definition of success is going from failure to failure with no loss of enthusiasm.
That's me. That's right.
Yeah. And you know what? That's called having a sense of humor about yourself, because it's so easy to have a molehill set you back for weeks until you start to relate to it like a molehill, or then it's just a bump, or maybe it's not even something you even notice any longer. But that resilience, that ability to process something without immediately having your entire future take a shape that you're not, that you don't want or you can't be with, gives you that opportunity to be aware, to be present, and to be available in a relationship with yourself first, and then with other people, if you choose to.
Yeah. And I think that, for me, I'm looking at, let's say, the way things have been going, and I'm thinking to myself, like, and taking a moment to really acknowledge when there's something right that happens. Like something that's really, maybe it's not going to solve all the problems, and even might not even make a nick in whatever it is you're going for, but it's something positive, and saying, oh, cool. That's really good, because speaking from experience, I know I get wrapped up in everything that's not working.
Yeah.
I mean, let's be totally vulnerable and honest here.
Yeah.
It's not working, as opposed to what, and forgetting or just not, and like you said, it's trying to get some when you're trying to get out of something. It's that one thing, that one, pinpoint that might be working. You're
Yeah.
like, oh, okay. And then maybe the next day it's two things that work.
Yeah. Well, there's a couple of takeaways that I've gotten out of the last 4 or 5 minutes with you sharing and everything. And I think the first one is yes, by all means, give yourself permission to be exactly how you are and exactly how you're not. Allow for it just to be. And the second part of it is if you are interested in, paying a little bit more attention and giving yourself, some needed attention, then by all means do that. And I think the neat part is to listen in such a way that you can um, not be affected by valuing good or bad what happened, but making a decision as to whether or not it worked to the level that you're establishing for how you want to operate in the world. And then if it's really not up to that level, then you can do something to upgrade the circumstance, but not make it bad and wrong.
Mhm, mhm.
I love what you said. I
Thank
said
you.
it in different words.
Of course you did.
Yeah.
No, but because I'm thinking about like something that happened this morning, and I'm thinking to myself, first of all, I've got to I did acknowledge it, but I want to acknowledge it with the person because would be a new kind of idea between two people, the two of us,
Right.
and acknowledging that, actually saying, I'm so appreciative that she wants to even attempt to do something like that's really exciting, whether it
Yes.
works or it doesn't work, and then it starts to, for me, I look at it as eliminating some possibility or some possible self-doubt of like, you know, and so I think that happens too. And I'm not saying it's not bad. Is like we start to question, like, and then to get some sort of message or signal or sign that okay, this is true. I'm, whatever it is. And it was so funny because I was talking to a friend. It's just a funny story. She said she opened up her business, and she's doing her first event, and she buys like a sign, and she's saying to the universe, like, give me a sign that this is what I should be doing. Give me a sign that I'm supposed to go for this. And she goes and to get the sign, and on it there's a post-it note that says, "This is your sign."
I
And
like it.
she was like, yes, because all the subtle signs I couldn't see, but I needed to have a sign that was going to be out there basically in neon letters, like, this is your sign that you should be doing this kind of thing. And it just made me laugh because we were
Yeah.
talking about, being the types of people that sometimes need to be hit over the head. But I think at some point or another, we all do. It's kind of like, this is your sign that this is what you should be doing, or this isn't what you should be doing, because we don't listen to those kind of subtle cues. We need a little bit more of a,
Yeah.
like a jarring wake up alarm or call.
Yeah. Until we become interested in creating a capital S self, we're a cluster of habits that just does whatever those habits do. And
Mhm.
once we decide that we're going to be aware or we're going to listen for the habits that we like and amplify those, and listen for the habits that are not serving us and seeing what we can do to replace those, not change them, but absolutely grow some new habits, then you got this whole thing dynamic going on that you're a human being under construction. You're a being in training, as opposed to somebody who's just a butthead who hasn't and never did get it figured out and never will. I think there's something really empowering to decide that you're on a trail for improving how your life occurs for you on purpose. Like you can take some responsibility in the matter of your own enjoyment and satisfaction.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, no, there's something about looking, and that idea of taking responsibility.
If you don't, who's gonna?
Well, and also, I mean, to me, this whole idea of then you take it out of like, and this is not how I navigate, like whether, I take responsibility for some whatever, but I don't go down the blame game of like, well, this is so and so, or this is society's fault, or this is like, that's not the type, like, that's not how I navigate the world. Like, trying to find someone else to blame for what's going on. If anything, I direct it inward, which isn't necessarily useful either, but at all. But this whole idea of like, I'm not looking to blame anybody else for the stuff that's going on that doesn't work in my life. Like, there is this element of, and people don't like to say, we're being responsible, of taking responsibility. Like, if something doesn't work, well, it doesn't work because, you know, not in a harsh way, but I didn't navigate the situation well.
Or maybe it just didn't work. Maybe there's no because.
Maybe
Maybe
that's
there's
right.
no why. Maybe it's just like, okay, you got up to bat, you swung the bat, you didn't hit the ball. What are you going to do? Take a new pitch and swing again.
Well, yeah, and like you said, learn. Like,
Yeah.
look at it and say, okay, well, I've got to take a wider stance when I go up to the bat, or I've got to develop my arm, or whatever it was. Or you go up and you try again and it still doesn't work. And maybe it takes 3 tries to realize that you get up and you're like, okay, well, this isn't working.
Well, using a little bit of overstatement, you can notice in your life where you're saying, I am a horrible human being, I suck, and I will never accomplish anything. And transforming your experience of that moment into, well, that didn't work. I wonder, I wonder what would work. What can I do, differently? What can I do again? What can I do where I have some say so about it? But you can't emotionally beat yourself to death and expect any better results than if somebody else were doing it to you, you know? So you have to be kind and rewind, right?
Oh, I like that. Be kind and rewind. That was very well said, Bill.
Yeah. I think getting a good reverse gear is a really good one, because sometimes you're going to be thrown to have your face get all red and hot. And now all you can do is just say, well, what in the dickens is that? you know, uh, Nothing really. Now let's try it again. That didn't work. Let's do it again. That didn't work. Let's do it again.
Yeah, and I always like, it's like, I remember, I think it was actually one of my nieces and nephews, think one day did something and then kind of like, spilled like a bottle of like baby powder on, like, like opened up a bottle of baby powder and it went everywhere. And literally it going like this, going, what was I thinking? you know? As you can see it, they were sitting on top of the stairs, baby powder's like going all the way down the staircase. And they're like, what was I thinking? They were like 3, like, or 2.
Doing what 3-year-olds and 2-year-olds do, right?
Oh my gosh. When life is just this huge, like, bottle of baby powder, and whether it spills, I mean, you could say glitter, Have
Ah,
you
it's a
ever tried to? Mary Jane and I did a workshop where we did some and we used glitter. And I haven't used glitter, like fine glitter, in a really long time. And so, yes, I put out newspapers or whatever. Well, I want to tell you, it's like a year ago, and I still walk around, and every now and then I'll look at the floor and I'll just see it sparkle, and I'm like, okay, it's like, okay, it gets everywhere.
fantastic. Well, guess what we did again?
Oh my goodness, yeah, we did. What were we thinking?
I I don't know, but I like it. An hour spent with you, my friend, is better than an hour spent doing a lot of other things. That's for darn sure.
Oh, thank you. Same here.
Well, I'll tell you what, I'm very interested in finding out if I've got water pressure.
Oh, yes, I don't blame you. Do you have bottled water, Bill? So that you
Um,
can like,
yeah, no, I've got, we do have some bottled water,
okay.
but we've also got, I mean, it doesn't really matter what the pressure is all that much because we've got, water dispenser in our refrigerator, and we also use a filter. I drink unfiltered water or filtered water all the time, pretty much.
Okay, just wondering as I think about you, but yeah, I mean, I was going to say I'm going to send everybody home with this image in their mind, as I now have this image in my mind of like looking at life like glitter. I like that image.
Yeah, search for the glitter.
Mm-hmm.
Find the glitter. Do yourself a favor and find the glitter.
Find the glitter.
Excellent. Anything else in summary?
Anything else in summary? No, not for me. I'm complete.
Well, and I am as well. I just want to say you once again, thank you, my bosom buddyette. There is so much about our chats that gets me through the week. And I think with that said, before we sign off, I do want to invite people, especially now, there's a lot going on in the world, and there are some people that are really struggling to let other people know that they're not okay with it, or they let people know that they're not okay with it inappropriately. But again, as we say pretty much every week, would you please reach out to somebody that you love and let them know that you care, and that you'll always be there for them, and your world works because they are in it. And don't they ever make any decisions, important decisions, without giving you a chance to at least, give them a verbal hug or whatever else it is. So as time goes on, we do that for each other often enough, we're going to have a lot more friends around for a lot longer period of time. And I do think that that's not too shabby.
Mm-hmm.
So with that said, ladies and gentlemen, we are lighting the candle, a world that works. I'm Bill Correll, and I'm here with Jan Jeremias. And so long for now.
Bye-bye, everybody.
You've been listening to Lighting the Candle, a world that works, part of the Xvadio podcast network. You can catch every episode of Lighting the Candle, as well as the rest of the network, at xvadio.com, the Apple Podcasts app, YouTube, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts.